Kia ora, Internet!
Hello and welcome to the Sky Bear Games Podcast!
Doo-doo-doo!
Episode 29.
Nice. So, for today, we have a slightly controversial topic to talk about. Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition.
Ooh.
Nobody's favourite edition.
Ah.
Sorry to the one person out there who loved 4th edition, but actually there's more than one because, you know what? We really liked 4th edition, and so today's podcast is about 4th edition, actually not that bad.
What a hot take.
It's quite underselling it, isn't it? Okay, here's my actual hot take. If Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition had launched with any other name, it would have been one of the big hits and critical darlings of role-playing games.
Interesting.
Well, asterisk. So yeah, let's talk about our history with 4th edition, I guess.
4th edition is where I started. I did not know about editions or anything like this.
Yeah, so 4th edition was where I started running games in game stores. So before that, I'd played 2nd edition and 3rd edition mostly at high school and university. But 4th edition was where I was actually the GM in the shop, running the game week in, week out for anybody who wanted to show up.
Like me.
Like Claire. And that was how we met.
Whereas for me, I did not know that there were different editions. And some American friends were telling me all about D&D, and so I just went and found what I could about D&D, and it was all 4th edition. I just didn't know that. That
was just what was on the shelves at the time.
Exactly. So I found that. I had the starter set or whatever it was called.
Yeah.
And I tried to run it for my friends, and I had no idea what I was doing. And then so I was like, right, I need to play this with someone who actually knows what they're doing, and that's how I found you.
And that was me. Yeah, so we ran the Chaos Scar adventures from D&D Insider, and yeah, we had a grand old time. I can't remember what happened to end that campaign early. I do remember it did wind up wrapping up early. So we had a sort of sandboxy campaign where players would go in and explore all these little dungeon sites and explore the Chaos Scar, which, if you are unfamiliar with it, it's like a revamp of the Keep on the Borderlands from 1st edition. So you've got the Keep, and then next to it, rather than the Caves of Chaos, you have the site where this meteor landed and gouged this scar, this Chaos Scar, if you will, into the land, and all sorts of weird monsters have popped up around it because the meteor was a far realm Cthulhuid meteorite.
Such a cool premise.
It was so cool. There was so much cool stuff that we did. I still remember that Pillar of Eyes.
Pillar of Eyes. Oh, it was so
the imagery
cool.
of that was awesome. And we brought a lot of the non-combat stuff in as well. I remember we had a castle show up from the Feywild, and the players went to negotiate with them. And I think you were a Wilden druid, who were like mini tree people, not like a full-on treant, but like a human-sized tree person. And you were like an eco-terrorist, a refugee from the Feywild.
Yeah.
Feywild had got too hot to hold you.
Yeah.
But yeah, we never got round to finishing that off, and then years later we reintroduced that character in Curse of Strahd. Anyway, I wound up running a lot of 4th edition, and my attitude towards 4th edition changed drastically through the time that I spent with it. I remember when it came out, I was super excited, then I actually played a game of it, and my excitement crashed and burnt really hard. And then when we were doing our games, the Chaos Scar game, that was quite sort of late on in 4th edition. That was sort of its last hurrah.
2 years before D&D Next started getting rolled out.
Definitely Player's Handbook 3 was out, so there can't have been much time left after that.
Actually, I mean, they might have even started rolling it out that same year that I started playing.
Might be, or it might be the year after.
Yeah.
4th edition didn't have a very long run because it got such a bad reaction that they decided to pull the plug on it pretty quickly. And to me, that's kind of a shame.
Because they only really started to find their feet towards the end, right?
Yeah, so for me, what I think happened is 4th edition was such a huge shift from 3rd edition that the designers themselves didn't really appreciate what a huge change this was. To the extent where, like I said, it would have been better off calling it a completely different game. It killed so many sacred cows along the way of D&D is done this way because it's always been done this way.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the big strengths of 4th edition was that it really actually examined what was going on with D&D, how people played it, and then really articulated how the game should work and how it should all fit together. But in the early years, I don't think they'd fully worked through all of that. And so you got... so for the big thing with 4th edition, of course, was the fights.
Yeah.
Fights were big and epic. I can still remember there was one fight where we had where we wound up becoming the babysitting service for all these kids who came in to play. So I wound up running a fight where I had, 12, 14 players?
Yeah, there was a huge table.
And we just had one fight all evening. There was an evil tree in the middle, and it was spawning minions all around. We had different groups of PCs. We split the table into 4 corners, and we just threw initiative out the corner because it was just utterly
we just went around the table.
We just went around the table, and I think once everybody in a particular quarter had gone, then all the bad guys in their quarter went, and then we went on to the next one. We just went around the table. And yeah, different groups had different sub-goals that they wanted to achieve and were meeting each other for the first time. And since then, I've heard about how in 5th edition you get epics where you have multiple tables playing the same dungeon or doing the same scenario, and this felt like that.
Right.
Except without special rules, just with a bunch of people showed up. We had this massive fight. I remember, the barbarians were rushing halfway across the board and doing massive critical hits. Everybody was doing all their cool powers. Fireballs were flying. It was epic.
Because 4th edition scales better than 5th edition does.
Absolutely.
Or at least easier. 5th edition, you have to do a bunch of maths, whereas 4th edition, it's there for you.
Yeah, so 4th edition, one of its strengths was that the maths was rock solid, mostly.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things early on with the monster stats where they gave the monsters too many hit points and not enough damage.
Right, so it became a slog.
And it became quite grindy. And then after, halfway through, when most people had given up on 4th edition and gone over to Pathfinder, they changed the maths and they flipped that. So monsters suddenly did way more damage, but were much flimsier.
Right. Much more interesting.
Yeah, everyone who stuck around was like, oh, these monsters are really cool now. But monster design generally was really awesome. So as part of that articulation, they had, these monsters are brutes and they're really big and strong. These monsters are artillery and they should stay back and shoot. These monsters are skulkers and they're going to sneak around and do... These monsters are skirmishers. And it was really easy to just pick a handful of monsters that were all of the right general challenge level to just made sure you had a mix of the different types and you were good to go. So in 5th edition, where I've got to do the maths about, okay, so we've got this many people in the group, and so that's equivalent to a this level encounter.
Yeah.
But if I have more than 6 minions, 6 monsters, then I have to double their XP for the sakes of calculating the encounter and all of this stuff. Didn't have to worry about that in 5th edition. 4th edition, you just threw all the stuff down, and the maths would make it all work.
Yeah.
And it worked like a charm every time.
Because I came in on 4th edition, I didn't appreciate until I saw more systems and saw older systems, and even 5th edition. I did not, as a GM, appreciate the tactics in the monster description boxes. Those were actually really cool.
Yeah, compared to in earlier or later editions where something like a goblin will have a very simple, it will move and it will stab. In 4th edition, every different type of monster had its own unique little tactic that it would pull off, or its own little combo that it was trying to do. And that was really cool. And also, massive shout out to a couple of innovations that they put in 4th edition to make the combat really pop which I wish they sort of kept them in 5th edition, but they kind of threw them out. Solo monsters, which was one monster that was big enough to take on an entire party.
Yeah.
And they started at level 1. So at level 1, you could fight a white dragon, and it would be this big, epic fight.
Damn.
Or, on the other end of the scale, you had minions, which were monsters that had 1 hit point only.
I liked minions.
And I think 4 minions added up to 1 regular monster.
Yeah, something like that.
And so it was so easy to just go, okay, here's a room with a ton of skeletons, and there's a big dragon at the back. Big blue dragon at the back, shooting lightning bolts at you while all the skeletons charge forward, and there's endless waves. And the heroes got to feel really badass because they could just, swing their axe and take out 3 skeletons at once. And I wish minions, particularly, were still around. Because they were so easy to run, because they were either alive or they were dead. There was no bookkeeping for them.
It was very video gamey. Very cinematic.
And that was actually one of the problems early on with 4th edition, was when everything is big and video gamey and cinematic, it slows the game down wildly. I don't think the designers realised that you couldn't run a 3rd edition style dungeon crawl the way you used to do it. And so a lot of the early adventures were awful.
Oh.
Absolutely awful. I cannot despise them enough. There are not enough words for how bad those early adventures are, because they would have a dungeon where you had 15 rooms that you had to clear, and that's 15 huge cinematic fights.
Oh, jeez. That's a bit much. Also, I wonder how much did this play into that sort of anti-dungeon crawl ethic? The whole introduction of encounter powers and daily powers and all that of that. That was a huge change from 3rd edition, right?
That was a massive change.
And it's been completely wiped now.
Well, yes and no.
Explain.
So, right, in 3rd edition, of course, all the classes played completely by different rules. And there was much more of, one class is better than another, or in certain ways. So
you want to be a wizard at high levels, not a fighter at high levels.
Famously,
I remember that.
At low levels, a wizard was utterly lame, and you would cast your 1 spell per day, and then you would get out your light crossbow and stand at the back of the group and just take pot shots. And that was kind of lame. And on the other hand, I remember at level 1, I think a druid had a bear who was their friend, and they could turn into a bear. And a bear was about as good as a fighter. So a druid started off being 2 fighters. At level 1.
I see no problem with this.
And they would rapidly expand their Ursine horde.
I see no problem whatsoever.
And meanwhile, wizards, as they leveled up, in 5th edition, you have to spend spell slots to... if you want your magic missile to be a better magic missile, you have to spend a spell slot. But in 3rd edition, your spells automatically leveled up with you.
Oh.
And you got more of them. And you got better ones. And you could concentrate on any number of spells at once. And so once you got past, I want to say it was about 6th level. 6th level was where it was called Quadratic Wizards Linear Warriors or something like that. The idea was that warriors just increased
linear progression.
Linearly. You had 1 attack, and then it turned into 2 attacks, and then it turned into 3 attacks, and then it turned into 4 attacks. So at the best, you were 4 fighters. But the wizard, by the time that you could attack 4 times around, could stop time and then turn themselves invisible while summoning in a meteor shower. And let's just say they disintegrate the enemy commander while they're at it.
I love it.
Yeah. Oh, and they're flying.
Always be flying.
All of that in the same time that the fighter has attacked 4 times. And so, this idea that the wizards just completely dominated the game. Druids, clerics, all the big spellcasters were just better than everyone else. So, 4th edition changed this. What it did was it said that everybody worked under the same metrics. Everybody had their at-will powers, which they could just do whenever they wanted, and had really little effects. And then they had their encounter powers, which you could do once a fight, and they were pretty cool. And you had your daily power, which was really big and did something really awesome. And I remember people got upset about this. They were like, why does my fighter now cast spells? Why do I have powers for my fighter?
Where are my spell slots?
Yeah, but at the same time, the classes were actually balanced against each other. Yeah, the wizard wasn't as ridiculous as they were before, but this was an edition where it was actually really fun to play a fighter. Like, really,
I remember.
really fun to be a fighter.
I remember, yeah, it was. It was more like World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
Because fighters and paladins and stuff and all that, they all have their, like, charged attacks and stuff.
And this, to me, like, this was part of their articulation of, in the past, there's always been the sort of thing of, there are the fighter classes, there's the warrior type classes, there's the wizard type classes, the cleric type classes, and rogue type classes, and you want one of each. But there'd never really been anybody who'd articulated why you want one of each, what they actually do in a group. Well, the cleric does the healing, I guess, but 4th edition, where it said there are now strikers, there are defenders, there are leaders and controllers. Thank you, Claire. And so each class had their special powers that let them actually really be cool at their thing that they did. And so I remember if you were a fighter, you were ridiculously good at making all the monsters want to punch you.
I just realised, or maybe I realised this a while ago.
Yeah.
They just took the WoW types and renamed them, so tank, DPS.
Pretty much, yeah.
What's White Mage and Black Mage called?
Healer, and then the other one...
like area effect or something?
It is still DPS, but yeah, they split into area effect versus single target, basically.
Right.
And against, like, if you had 50 minions coming at you, you didn't want to be wasting time punching them one by one. No. You needed to have someone who could area effect them. Yeah. And yeah, it was really cool. It was a really good metric.
See, going forward to 5th edition now, what I like is that, I like that they've come up with a compromise. 3rd edition, 1st level wizard blows their spell, crossbow from then on.
Yeah.
4th edition wizard, always chucking something around, but to some people, doesn't feel different enough from the other classes because everyone's got a slightly magical thing about them now. 5th edition, cantrip.
Yeah.
Your basic attack is pretty much always your cantrip.
And that's a 4th edition thing.
Yeah, it's using that at-will thing, but it's sort of removing a little bit of the, like, over-magicness of the fighter.
Sure.
I mean, there are still, like, fighters still have cool stuff.
So that was actually something that happened in 4th edition. So halfway through 4th edition, they realised that they'd alienated their player base, and they tried doing basically 4.5 edition, which was called Essentials. And I remember in Essentials, the fighter went back to, I just make an attack.
Which is where I came in.
Yeah, which is about where you came in. Yeah, that went back to, the fighter just makes an attack, but they get bonus things they can do when they just make an attack. And so the idea was to make it look a bit more like old D&D. But it was too late.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is kind of to me, the moral of 4th edition, that they figured out what it was and how to make it sing too late when people had stopped caring. Yeah,
all the people who wanted 3.5 back had already migrated to Pathfinder.
Yeah. All the people who were willing to give 4th edition a try got to play with the, frankly, not that great basic original 3 books, and had gone, I don't like this isn't good. And all the really cool stuff came right at the end of 4th edition.
Like what?
Well, we'll get to that in a bit when we do our top 5 things. I want to talk about some more things that were awesome about 4th edition.
Yeah, go on.
Because I remember another thing that people didn't like at the time, they found it a bit confusing, but I thought was brilliant. 4th edition had the most detailed, for all that we think of it as being the combat edition, with its big, 1 hour set piece fights. 4th edition had the most detailed rules for doing out of combat tasks that any edition of D&D has had. And it's the skill challenges. Now, once again, there's another thing where early on they hadn't quite figured this out because it was something quite new. So the idea was basically that in older games, and now in 5th edition again, let's say you want to persuade someone of something. Okay, make a persuasion check. Oh, you rolled high? Done. That was it. The entire outcome relied on one dice roll. There was no tension, and you just rolled the dice and that was it. But you failed? Well, that's that. It's over. You failed that. So 4th edition put in the framework of skill challenges, where you had to achieve a certain number of successes before you reached a certain number of fails. And so, for example, for an easy one, you might just need to get, say, 4 successes before 3 fails.
Okay.
Whereas for a harder one, you might need, 10 successes before you got 3 failures.
That's interesting.
And so it meant that everybody had to contribute.
Yeah, and also that you can role play out the encounter between the dice rolls.
Yeah. So if
What
you
new
blow
thing are
your
you
persuasion
adding in?
check, you go, okay, I'm going for this particular tactic. I'm not just trying to do the entire thing. I'm going for but think about your homeland, and then you roll the dice, and it'd be like, what has my country ever done for me? And then you could go for a different tack.
It's interesting.
And later on, they started adding in things where... So one of the ideas was also that you wouldn't have a particular skill that worked for it. That you might have... That you were encouraged the players to say what skills they thought were relevant and to try and use their skills that they had. And so you could have a player go like, okay, I'm really athletic. How can my athleticism lend itself to the situation?
Yeah.
And that's actually quite cool.
Yeah.
And so what it would do is generally they'd have notes about these skills, if you use them, are really good. They will work well. So if you're trying to persuade someone, intimidate, bluff, persuasion, deception, all those sorts of things, they're going to be good. These skills, if you try for use your religious knowledge to...
Yeah, or your historical
knowledge or something. It's like, okay, you're stretching a little bit, that's still relevant. Higher difficulty class, because you're trying something a little bit weirder.
Yeah.
And also mean you could customize it for this guy, he's really gullible, but if you try and intimidate him, it's just going to put his back right up.
Sure, yeah, totally.
And you could also, there would be things where it would unlock certain things. So it's the first time you try to, intimidate him, he changes his personality and he starts acting in different ways. And so there was all this technology baked into it.
Wow.
And it could simulate just about anything.
I'm sad they got rid of this.
Yeah. I thought they were really cool. Like I said, early ones were not done particularly well and were kind of confusing. And it really was later on that they'd have big, elaborate skill challenges that had all these sort of if this, then that. And
gosh, that's interesting.
And so what I would do if I was going to run 4th edition again now and I wanted to do a dungeon crawl, I would not do, say, fight the goblins at the gate. I would not do that as a fight. I'd do it as a skill challenge. And if you lost, your cost would be you'd lose some hit points or something.
Okay.
And so the assumption is you're going to win. You're going to get through. But if you fail the challenge, you take some damage and you've alerted the enemies. And I would only break out the miniatures for when we were doing, this is a big dramatic fight scene.
Yeah.
Or if I was going to do the dungeon crawl version of, you're assaulting the gates and can you get past the guards? I wouldn't have the fight be the gates. I'd have the fight be the entire first half of the dungeon at once.
Oh, I kind of want to see that.
Right?
I kind of want to see that.
If you're going to put the miniatures down to do a giant hour-long fight, make it be worth it.
Damn.
And actually, even in 5th edition, we tend to have a lot of sessions where we just do role-playing.
Yeah.
But that means that when we have a fighting session in 5th edition, we will do a big, dramatic fight. So you remember the one we did where we had the Saint and all the players and all the NPCs and all the hirelings versus an entire plague island inhabited by the spirit of the Black Death?
Yeah, you could do it all as one.
4th edition would have loved that fight.
The way you ran it, it basically was happening all at once.
It was
cinematically and
yeah.
Without minis, I feel like you edited that on the fly very well.
Yeah, we made it work.
But I can see it working in a
4th edition would have loved it, and there would have been terrain effects from the plague.
Yes.
And the different monsters would have had different tactics more, and it would have taken ages to do, but it would have been the most epic fight ever.
Fully.
So the skill challenge was something else that I really loved about 4th edition.
Well, feel free to put that back into our 5th edition games if you want, because I'm keen. I like that so much more than, hey, here's this thing you're really good at. Oh, you rolled low.
Yeah.
Too bad.
Yeah, whereas, let's say you did the persuasion, you blew the roll in the skill challenge one, then it's
take another tack. Yeah.
Take a different tack, take a different angle, and roll again.
Yeah.
And all it means is that I put a little cross, and that's one failure knocked off.
Yep. I like that.
Yep. People felt they were quite rigid to start off with, because it's you will do this. And even if you persuaded someone, you still had to build up the extra successes. But if you do it as a bit more sort of fluidly and reactive to what the players are doing, you could make something really cool happen. And another thing I really liked that I thought 4th edition did really well was when it articulated the different roles and so on. It also articulated what you did at the different levels.
Oh,
And it
yeah.
had the 3 different tiers of play.
Oh, yes. I remember this because it took me a while to break out of this chain of thought when we went to 5th edition. And I was
It's
just
still
like...
kind of there in 5th edition, but they've
Yeah.
hidden it.
I was
Just
sort of like, wait, what? You don't go up to level 13 anymore? What? There's no such thing as epic
destinies.
What?
Yeah, so one thing that was really cool, it was that you had this, like, from level 1 to 10, you were a hero on, like, a local level. You'd run around your village, your city, maybe even your kingdom, and that was sort of the level. Level 11 to 20, you would go international. And then level 21 to 30, you'd go interplanar, you'd go cosmic. You picked up I can't remember what they were all called. I know the ultimate one was the Epic Destiny. That was the really cool one, where you got to determine, like, what was the path your hero was taking to become an epic person.
It was on the tip of my tongue. Prestige class.
No, that's the 3rd edition one. There was Paragon Path.
Paragon
Path was the... So yes, you got to specialise into your Paragon Path, but more awesomely, you got to pick your Epic Destiny, where you said, I am going to be a demigod. Sweet. I don't think we ever got a game that got up to those levels.
No, I don't know.
Got anywhere near those.
I don't know why I bothered reading about these things, because I think
They excited me every time I did. I was like, oh, this is so cool.
I got to maybe level 4 or 5 if I was lucky.
I remember my actual favourite one, this is a character I always wanted to do, was you could become a warlock who took a pact with your future self. You could go, I am a Fey Pact warlock, and I am going to become an Archfey, and I make a pact with my future self. And your Epic Destiny had things like, when you're about to die, your future self steps in and goes, nope, not happening, all King the Conqueror like, and then goes back to their own timeline.
I feel so seen right now.
Why?
That's me. Anyway,
Okay.
carry on.
Alright, I'm expecting Cosmic Claire to intervene next time our toddler has a messy nappy. Then apart from that, 4th edition had superb fluff. And actually, the fluff is my favourite thing. Of all the things I've said so far, the fluff is absolutely my favourite thing in all of it.
Okay.
Because it took a completely different approach to fluff than any other edition.
So.
And I think it's genius. So, in 4th edition, it implied the background, but it never filled in any details.
Okay.
You got the Nentir Vale, which was your little area that it gave you like a full map for. And then it said, but all the cool stuff, this is just like your starting area. All the cool stuff happened off the map somewhere. And it would constantly drop these names and references to things that had happened. So there was the Dawn War, where the gods and the primordials fought for the future of creation. What were the details? Don't know. What do you want the details to be? How do you want that to have worked out? The only really canon thing is the gods won, and that's how we got to where we are. In the past, there were the great empires of Arcosia and Baal Turath that fought each other in a epic war, Dragonborn versus Tieflings. What were the details of that? What do you want them to be? However you want that to play out in your game. Just recently, the Empire of Nerath fell. The Great Human Empire. What was it like? What do you want it to be like? And so you had this shared vocabulary and these concepts that kept popping up. But you could do literally anything with them because there was no official sort of pinned down lore about any of these things.
Wow.
And that was awesome.
Yeah.
It was really cool. I know in the current edition they're trying really hard not to overwhelm people with the amount of lore that's going on and the size of the world, and so the Forgotten Realms is not getting much detail. But this is just taking the entirely different concept. You have the ideas of what the setting is like. The Feywild and the Shadowfell, which were things that 4th edition created, and they were awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's in the Feywild if you go there? What do you want to be in the Feywild? Who are the Archfey? Here are some of the Archfey. Use one of them or make your own one, because it's your world now. And I thought that was just a really awesome concept. And it encouraged the PCs to play around with them in a completely different way. I remember there was one Warlock class where you made a pact with the vestiges of dead entities. And the default starter one was the last king of Nerath.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so your starting point is you're Joan of Arc.
Hmm.
That's amazing. And then if you took the right epic destiny, you could refound Nereth.
Huh.
Brilliant. Love it. And that's not really something that they can ever even offer in 5th edition.
No.
So, that's my thoughts about why I actually like 4th edition.
Right.
Anything you want to add on?
I remember feeling like, just in a whole lot of things that I'd read, Order of the Stick, for example, or other people writing about their 3rd edition campaigns. I'd seen this concept, spell slots. So coming in at 4th edition, I had like no idea what that meant. And in a way, it was actually a more friendlier for newbies thing of like, at-wills, anytime. Encounters, per encounter. Dailies, once per day.
It's very like, how does this thing work? Exactly how it says it works.
Unlike spell slots, which, depending on your class, have different rules about when they refresh. And...
They kind of have kept the 4th edition stuff. It's just hidden now.
Yeah. Cantrips are great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got your cantrips, which you can do whenever you want. You've got your powers, which refresh every time you take a short rest.
Yeah.
So they're encounter powers. Yeah. And you've got your encounters that refresh every time you take a long rest. So
and
they're
you've
dailies.
Also got you've got the difference between warlocks and wizards functionally, besides all the backstory that goes into the different ones and the fact that one's int and one's charisma, is wizards learn this stuff. They've got it in a book. They can pick and choose out of their book. Warlocks. And wizards have a lot of spell slots every day, but when they're gone, they're gone. Whereas warlocks, you're good to go for a short burst, have a little rest, it all comes back.
Yeah, you've only got a couple of tricks, but you can just keep doing those tricks over and over.
So what we've found throughout the many different campaigns that we've done, even just one player, one GM, is it is a completely different flavour of campaign, and just the general feeling of exploring and adventuring and fighting is completely different when your party has a wizard in it or a warlock in it.
Yeah. If you've got a wizard in your party, you rock up to like some big set-piece encounter. It's like, right, I'm going to just take this out.
You take out the big thing.
And then I'm going to go to sleep for the rest of the day.
Yeah.
Whereas the warlock is like, I can just keep doing this.
Yeah, warlock is...
indefinitely.
A warlock is pretty good for a dungeon crawl.
Yeah.
Whereas a wizard is pretty good for, actually really good for Dragons of Tyrania.
Yeah.
Where you probably won't get into lots of little fights during the day. You probably will use a ton of utility spells.
And then you might have one big
epic fight. Yeah. But warlocks and sorcerers and stuff are pretty good for dungeon crawling.
Yeah.
So.
Actually, a lot of the things in 5th edition, like warlocks, I think they were introduced in 3rd edition in a splat book. But they became core in 4th edition. Dragonborn became core in 4th edition. Tieflings became core in 4th edition.
So a lot of the flavour hung around from 4th edition.
4th edition, they made a big thing about 4th edition is gone. We're going back to how things were. But sort of sneaking away in there, just hiding in the background, there is a lot of that stuff.
To be fair, though, it's stuff that people liked from late 3rd edition. That came in at the base of 4th edition because they knew how much people liked it. Tieflings and stuff like that.
Tieflings have been around since, Planescape, if not earlier.
Yeah.
But, they really got made front and centre and got given their old, horny, for lack of a better word, look.
What else did I like? Yeah, to be honest, I'm not hugely phased about minis. I know, some people love minis so much, can't be without them. You and I tend to be more theatre of the mind.
Yeah.
So in that way,
didn't really.
No, it doesn't support it really.
That.
But 5th edition supports theatre of the mind a lot better for us.
I know, even with 3rd edition though, 3rd edition was going heavily towards miniature use, and so 4th edition kind of took a trend that was already existing and codified it. Okay, the game is already all about combat and all about miniatures. Okay, we're just going to bake that in as a base assumption this time around. Similarly, the powers that the fighters got, and people saying that felt strange, that all came from a book that came out late 3rd edition.
Okay.
The name of which escapes me right now. Book of Swords, I want to say.
Okay.
Where you got more of the sort of wushu style fighters who can do all the cool special effects. Yeah. And that was quite well received, and so then that was a direct lead into 4th edition.
Yeah. So Basically, I just think it's a really interesting thing that I sort of do want to revisit one day.
I do too. And particularly, if I did, I think with the benefits of hindsight of those later books that are really good,
Yeah.
I think you could get something really special out of 4th edition. If you actually used it as a rules... Weirdly, if you use this combat-focused system and you focused on the rules light stuff...
So, complaint that we have about 5th edition is a lot of people go, why aren't people role-playing with this more, actually doing the talky stuff? And it's like, well, because the mechanics don't support it. Whereas D&D 4th edition, it's like, these mechanics are for fighting. Yeah. You can 100% say that without...
So there was actually meant to be a system for these are the mechanics for roleplay. The problem is they sort of sucked.
See, I don't remember learning about alignments until 5th edition.
So there were rituals in 4th edition. They're still around in 5th edition. The big difference, though, is in 5th edition, you've got to pay a cost in time to cast a ritual. 5 minutes to cast a ritual, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. That basically just means you can't cast a ritual in a fight, but apart from that, go for it. In 4th edition, rituals were split out. Basically, anybody could learn a ritual if they wanted to.
Huh.
I think wizards and spellcasters started off with the ability to cast them, and fighters could just jump through a minor hoop to get them. But all those rituals had all that sort of fun out of combat stuff, but you had to pay for them. Was it with money or was it with the XP? But I remember it was whichever one it was. I remember every group just went, nah, not doing that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. No, I can understand that.
Yep. So that was another thing I would change. I would have rituals be not awful. Because as soon as you went, oh, so that sucks, then suddenly there is nothing left but the combat mechanics.
Yeah. But I appreciate it for not really trying to pretend to be something it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also another combat mechanic that I just remembered that I did really like. I remember how it completely changed how healing works.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So in 3rd edition and 2nd edition and 1st edition, you had to have your dedicated healer. And all they would do was run around going, I heal you, I heal you, I heal you. And it was dull. Unless you were one friend of ours who loved it.
I am amazed by that. I had no idea.
4th edition changed it so that characters had their own baked-in healing resources. You had your healing surges.
Yeah.
And they were a part of your character. And so you had innate healing. And that freed up your cleric and, warlords.
Warlords. I miss warlords.
Warlords were amazing.
I seriously miss warlords.
So cool. Having martial healers who could encourage you. Anyway, having everybody have their own innate healing that they could use whenever they wanted, just badly.
Yeah.
And clerics and stuff could then focus on doing their own thing, and they could just make you better at doing your healing effects.
Second wind, man. Second wind.
Being a dwarf. Because dwarves could take their second wind as a bonus action.
Yeah.
Everybody else had to do it as an action. So if you're a dwarf, you just be like, oh no, things are going badly. Ah, okay,
Dwarves
I'm good to go
were
again.
The greatest.
Dwarves are
amazing.
Edition.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's something that stuck around for 5th edition too, because now you've got the hit dice that people can spend out of combat to automatically heal up during the day.
Wait. Hit dice went from 3rd edition?
Hit dice were originally just a definition of how to calculate the hit points that a monster had.
Oh.
That's their original source, is you'd use them, like, you'd say, this is an 8 hit dice monster, which meant this monster is going to have a hit point range from 8 to 64. And then the term hit dice got rejigged for 5th edition. So basically take the role of the healing surges from 4th edition of this is my natural baked-in healing capacity that I possess. And it lets you take the pressure off the healers so that they can actually do cool things.
Yeah.
Rather than just keep people alive, which was lame and boring.
I have very little desire to go back to 3rd edition.
Yeah.
Now that I know that, that's a bit boring.
It really is. So yeah, that was something else cool that